The sterile, cold light of the hospital room flickered overhead as Emily lay on the delivery bed, her face contorted with pain. Sweat dripped from her brow, and her grip tightened on the sides of the bed. The room was bustling with activity as nurses and doctors scrambled to ensure everything went smoothly for what they all believed was a typical birth. But when Emily's cries of pain grew louder and more frantic, something went wrong. "Push, Emily, push!" the doctor urged, his voice shaking slightly. She strained with all her might, her body trembling as she fought to bring her child into the world. It felt like hours, the pressure unbearable. When finally the cries of a baby echoed in the room, it was not the cry that anyone expected. The nurses gasped and stepped back, horrified. The doctor froze, his face draining of color as he looked down at the creature emerging from Emily's womb. A dog! The baby, a creature with soft fur, floppy ears, and a tail, was not human. It was a small, shaking puppy, its dark eyes blinking in confusion as it looked around the room. The nurses stood in stunned silence, mouths agape. Unable to contain her shock, one nurse stumbled backwards, knocking over a tray of instruments. "What? What is this?" one of the nurses whispered, her voice trembling. Emily, still weak from the delivery, let out a relieved sigh. She didn't expect this outcome, though she couldn't explain why. She reached out to cradle the puppy like a human child. "Is this a joke?" the doctor sputtered. "This can't be happening. This is impossible." The room was filled with shock, confusion, and disgust as the medical staff stood paralyzed, unsure of how to react. Outside the delivery room, Fred paced, his hands clenched into fists. He had been eagerly waiting for this moment, the birth of his first child with his mistress, Emily. He could not father a child with his wife, Linda, for over a decade. Fred had finally found solace in Emily, a younger woman who seemed to give him everything Linda couldn't: attention, affection, and the promise of a child. Fred and Linda's marriage had always been loving, but despite their best efforts, they had never been able to have children. They tried and failed for 11 years, and the silence between them grew as each attempt brought more heartache. Fred, unable to ignore his desire for a family, met Emily, a younger woman, and their affair began. It was supposed to be a brief fling, a moment of escape from the painful reality of his childless marriage. But things went deeper. Fred's affair continued behind his wife Linda's back, and as the months passed, Emily's demands grew stronger. His wife, however, began to suspect something was wrong. She had always been intuitive, and soon she noticed the subtle signs of her husband's changing behavior. One evening, Fred came home late, looking distant. The air between them was filled with tension. Linda went through her husband's phone, and tears rolled down her cheeks as she read all his chat with Emily. Unable to ignore her suspicions, Linda tracked Emily down. She confronted her in a moment of pure heartbreak, demanding answers. Emily, however, had no sympathy for Linda's pain. She mocked Linda's inability to give Fred the child he desperately wanted. "You're not the first to be cheated on," Emily said, laughing cruelly. "Maybe you should have thought about your husband's needs. You're barren, and that's why he's with me." The words struck Linda deeply, leaving her feeling betrayed on every level. Fred, oblivious to the depth of the confrontation between Linda and Emily, returned home to find Linda devastated. Emily had already warned him that Linda had discovered everything. Fred felt a deep sense of anxiety. His double life was falling apart. He wanted to end things with Emily, but when Emily told him she was pregnant, his fears gave way to excitement. A child. Finally, Fred would become a father. Overwhelmed by the prospect of fatherhood, Fred made a rash decision. He packed his bags and stormed out of the house. He was leaving Linda for good. "I'm moving in with Emily," he said, his voice filled with anger and exhilaration. Linda, caught off guard, begged him to stay, but Fred was resolute. It's too late, Linda. You can't give me what I need. With that, Fred left, and Linda's heart shattered. Linda was left behind in their house, alone and devastated. For days, she cried herself to sleep, questioning her worth, her place in Fred's life, and why her body had failed to conceive. Despite the pain, Linda prayed fervently, asking God to show her the way forward. "Avenge me, Lord," she whispered through her tears. "Bless me with a miracle and show him what he has lost." In the quiet of her grief, Linda received a visit from the police. A group of armed robbers had broken into her house that night. Linda, defenseless, was violently attacked. One of the robbers raped her, but the others took nothing, and the ordeal ended as quickly as it began. Broken physically and emotionally, Linda lay on the floor crying profusely. The whole world seems to be against her. She had no friends or siblings, no one to console her. Weeks passed, and Linda's life seemed to fall into chaos. But as time went on, something unexpected happened. She discovered she was pregnant. It didn't make sense. She hadn't been intimate with anyone in months, but she suddenly remembered the rape. She has been impregnated by one of the robbers who raped her. This is a blessing in disguise, Linda thought. I'm keeping this baby no matter what. God blessed her with a child. It was the miracle she had prayed for. Linda kept the news to herself, unwilling to share it with her runaway husband Fred or the world. Meanwhile, Fred returned to Linda's house filled with guilt. He wanted to apologize, to make amends for everything he had done. But when he saw Linda, her eyes glowing with the unmistakable signs of pregnancy, his guilt deepened. He didn't know what to say. He told Linda that Emily had given birth to a dog. Linda, however, had no interest in listening. She had found peace within herself, and though she would never forget the betrayal, she would never accept Fred back. Fred went back to Emily. Emily's jealousy and possessiveness made life very difficult for him. At the same time, Linda's strength and the knowledge that she was carrying a child filled her with a sense of purpose that Fred couldn't understand. Linda's pregnancy began to show, and she received support from church members. They rallied around her, offering love and encouragement. It became clear that Fred's return was only for his peace of mind, not because he genuinely cared about their marriage. Linda moved forward without him, determined to raise her child on her terms. Linda gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, Isaac. The delivery was smooth, and as she held her son for the first time, she knew this was her miracle. Isaac's first cries filled the room, and Linda knew that God had answered her prayers. Her heart swelled with love for her son, and she realized that she no longer needed Fred to complete her. Fred sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small, strange creature in the crib beside Emily. The puppy-like child whimpered weakly. Holding the baby in her arms, Emily cooed softly, oblivious to Fred's discomfort. At first, Fred had been excited about finally having a child, but now he felt nothing but dread. The child was not human, not a baby. It had fur, a tail, and a face, more animal than human. Fred had expected a miracle, a beautiful baby boy that he could call his own. But this was something else. He couldn't understand how she could be so attached to this thing. He had left Linda, his wife, for this, a dream that had turned into a nightmare. He believed Emily's promises and sweet words about the future, but now he was trapped. "Why does it look like this?" Fred finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. He had to know. This wasn't just a baby. It wasn't even close. Fred had just returned from Linda's house, his mind swirling with confusion and anger. His wife had rejected him without hesitation, and now he was heading back to Emily with no place left to go. But when he stepped inside the small apartment, the atmosphere was strangely quiet. There was no sound of the dog child crying, no soft murmurs from Emily. It was an eerie silence that unsettled him. He stood by the door for a moment, listening. Then he heard Emily's voice coming from the kitchen, faint but unmistakable, as if she were speaking to someone on the phone. I didn't want to, but I had to. You understand, don't you? It's not like Fred was ever going to give me a child. He couldn't even make that happen for me. So I went to the river goddess. She promised me a son if I did what she asked. I slept with the medicine man. He's the one who made me pregnant, not Fred. Fred froze. The words shock hitting him like a slap. His heart raced and his blood boiled as he realized what Emily had done. She had deceived him, used him, and now she was revealing it to a friend as if it was some casual affair. I thought I could make it work, Emily continued, her voice carrying pride and bitterness. But the baby, it wasn't what I expected. He looked more like a dog than a human and never had a chance. Fred's chest tightened as the weight of her confession hit him. Emily had used him as nothing more than a tool to get what she wanted. She hadn't loved him. She just wanted his money, attention, and a child that wasn't even his. The realization burned inside him, and he stormed toward the kitchen in uncontrollable rage. You lied to me! Fred's voice thundered through the apartment. Emily looked up, startled, dropping the phone to the counter. Her face was pale, but her eyes had no regret, only a cold, distant look. Fred's hands clenched into fists as he approached her. You used me. You went behind my back, slept with that medicine man, and now you're telling me you never even wanted my child. Emily's eyes narrowed, her voice steady. You think I wanted this? I wanted a child, Fred. I wanted your child, but you never gave me what I wanted. So I went elsewhere. Fred's fury exploded. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her violently. You never cared about me, Emily. You only wanted to trap me, to make me feel like I was the one to blame for your sick plan. Emily's eyes flashed angrily as she slapped his hands off her, but Fred wasn't done. He was consumed with rage, his thoughts clouded by betrayal. You lied to me. You used me. I trusted you. In a blind fury, Fred shoved Emily backwards, sending her crashing into the wall. The force of the impact made her cry out in pain, but Fred was beyond reasoning. He stormed toward the door, ready to leave and never look back. Back at Linda's home, things had been moving forward in ways Fred had never expected. She had found peace, something he couldn't seem to grasp. Linda's life was no longer consumed by the anger and betrayal of Fred's departure. She had Isaac now, a beautiful, healthy boy that filled her heart with joy. Every smile from him and giggle reminded her that she was enough. She was whole again, despite everything Fred had done to her. As Isaac grew, Linda's love for him deepened. She had never expected a child to come into her life, especially not after years of longing. And yet, here he was. He was her miracle, a true blessing. And Linda found the strength to rebuild her life with him. Despite Fred's betrayal, Linda had found a strength in herself that she never knew existed. She wasn't broken anymore. She was a mother. And that was all that mattered. Fred's regret hit him like a tidal wave after the death of the dog child. He knew he had made a mistake in leaving Linda. She had been the one to truly love him, the one who had always supported him. Now he could see it clearly. His obsession with Emily had led him down a path that had destroyed everything he held dear. Fred couldn't bring himself to confront Emily after the death of their child. He couldn't face the reality of the mess he had made. As he sat in the empty apartment with Emily, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. he reached out to Linda, wanting to apologize and fix everything. But Linda had moved on. She had Isaac, and she didn't need him anymore. When Fred approached her, she didn't hesitate. She didn't need to hear his apologies. She had found peace, and Fred had lost her forever. Thank you very much, friends, for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, like the video, and share. God bless you.